The most confusing aspect of loving an avoidant is witnessing how their deepest affection can transform into what appears to be hatred. This isn't malice or cruelty in the traditional sense, but rather a psychological defense mechanism so powerful that it turns love into its opposite. The person who means the most to them becomes the target of their most intense resistance, creating a devastating paradox that destroys relationships and leaves both parties bewildered by the transformation. Reason 1. They hate how vulnerable love makes them feel. The first and most fundamental reason avoidants develop hatred toward those they love cuts to the core of their psychological architecture. When they truly love someone, that person gains unprecedented power to hurt them, and this realization triggers their deepest terror. Their nervous system, calibrated for emotional survival through independence and self-protection, interprets this vulnerability as a threat to their psychological safety and begins treating their beloved as an enemy rather than a partner. The avoidant's entire defensive structure has been built around preventing anyone from getting close enough to matter. Their walls, their emotional distance, their self-sufficiency narrative, all of it serves to ensure that no one can hurt them through abandonment or rejection. But genuine love dismantles these defenses from the inside. They find themselves caring whether this person stays or leaves, needing this person's presence in ways that terrify them, depending on this person's affection for their sense of well-being. This dependence feels like weakness to someone whose identity revolves around strength through independence. The avoidant experiences love as a loss of control over their emotional state. Their carefully constructed walls become permeable, allowing feelings to flow in ways that feel dangerous and overwhelming. The person they love becomes associated with this terrifying loss of emotional regulation, triggering resentment that masks their underlying fear. Their hatred emerges as a protective response to their own vulnerability. They begin to view their beloved as the source of their emotional chaos rather than recognizing that love itself challenges their defensive structure. The deeper their feelings grow, the more threatened their psychological system becomes, generating anger and resentment toward the person who has unknowingly dismantled their emotional armor. This creates a cruel feedback loop where the more they love, the more they hate the feeling of loving. Their beloved becomes a walking reminder of their own emotional exposure, triggering defensive reactions that feel like hatred but are actually terror disguised as aggression. They might find themselves picking fights over nothing, criticizing their partner unfairly, or creating distance through cold behavior that seems disproportionate to any actual conflict. The avoidance nervous system is essentially screaming, "This person has too much power over me," and translating that panic into hostile feelings and behaviors. They don't consciously decide to hate someone they love. Their psychological survival mechanisms make that emotional transformation automatically as protection against the vulnerability love creates. What makes this particularly devastating is that the avoidant often cannot articulate or even fully recognize what's happening. They experience the hostile feelings as real and justified, constructing post hoc rationalizations for why their partner irritates them or disappoints them. They focus on their partner's flaws, magnify small issues into major problems, and convince themselves that their negative feelings stem from their partner's inadequacy rather than from their own terror of emotional dependence. Their partner, meanwhile, experiences whiplash. They're being loved and hated simultaneously, receiving mixed signals that create profound confusion and pain. The avoidant might be tender and connected one moment, then hostile and distant the next, with the shifts corresponding not to anything the partner did, but to the avoidant's internal struggle with their own vulnerability. The tragedy is that this hatred through vulnerability prevents the avoidant from experiencing the very thing that could heal their attachment wounds. If they could tolerate the vulnerability long enough to discover that dependence doesn't equal destruction, that needing someone doesn't necessarily lead to abandonment, they might learn that love can be safe. But their defensive hatred ensures they never stay vulnerable long enough to have that corrective experience. The intensity of this hatred often correlates directly with the depth of their love. The person they care about most triggers the strongest defensive response because they pose the greatest threat to the avoidant's emotional safety system. Someone they care about less doesn't activate the same panic, allowing the avoidant to maintain more consistent positive feelings. This creates the paradox where the avoidant can be kinder to casual connections than to their actual partner. Not because they care more about the casual connections, but because they care less, making those relationships feel safer. The avoidant's defensive hatred also manifests through devaluation strategies that protect them from their vulnerability. They begin cataloging their partner's flaws with obsessive attention, creating mental lists of disappointments and inadequacies that justify their hostile feelings. Every minor mistake becomes evidence of their partner's unsuitability. Every human imperfection gets magnified into a relationship-ending flaw. This devaluation serves a crucial psychological function. If they can convince themselves their partner isn't actually that great, then losing them won't hurt as much. The hatred becomes a preemptive strike against the pain of potential abandonment. They're essentially trying to fall out of love as protection against the terrifying vulnerability of staying in love. Their nervous system would rather endure the pain of pushing away someone wonderful than risk the devastation of needing someone who might leave. Reason 2. They hate being seen so completely. The second reason involves the avoidant's profound discomfort with being truly known and understood. When someone loves them deeply, that person inevitably sees through their carefully constructed facade to the wounded, needy parts they've spent their lifetime hiding. This level of visibility feels like emotional nakedness, triggering shame and rage at being so thoroughly exposed. The avoidant's identity is built on the illusion of self-sufficiency and emotional invulnerability. They've crafted a persona of someone who doesn't need others, who handles everything independently, who remains unaffected by emotional turbulence. This persona isn't just performance for others. It's how they've learned to see themselves, a critical component of their self-concept and self-esteem. When their beloved sees their fears, insecurities, and deep need for connection, it shatters the protective myth they've constructed about themselves. They begin to hate the person who witnesses their authentic self because that witnessing feels like a violation of their psychological privacy. Their partner becomes a mirror, reflecting back the parts of themselves they've worked hardest to deny. Their vulnerability, their emotional needs, their human fragility. This hatred intensifies because their beloved's seeing isn't judgmental or cruel. It's often loving and accepting. But the avoidant cannot integrate this acceptance. Their psychology has been organized around the belief that their authentic self is unacceptable, that their needs are shameful, that their vulnerability is weakness. When someone sees these hidden parts and responds with love rather than rejection, it creates cognitive dissonance the avoidant cannot resolve. They begin to resent their beloved for loving them completely, because complete love requires being completely seen, and being completely seen triggers their deepest shame. They'd rather be loved superficially by someone who doesn't truly know them than be loved deeply by someone who sees their whole self. The superficial love feels safer, because it doesn't threaten their defensive self-image. The avoidant might express this hatred through accusations that their partner is too intense, overthinks everything, or makes too big a deal out of emotional matters. What they're really communicating is, you see too much, you understand too deeply, you won't let me hide behind my defenses. They're attempting to push their partner back into a more comfortable distance, where true knowing cannot occur. Their beloved's understanding and acceptance paradoxically triggers their defensive systems more than rejection would. The avoidance nervous system cannot integrate being loved for their true self because it contradicts everything they believe about themselves. They begin to despise their beloved for loving their weakness, even though that weakness is simply their humanity. What makes this particularly cruel is that the avoidant punishes their partner for doing exactly what healthy love requires, seeing someone fully and loving them anyway. The partner's greatest act of love, accepting the avoidant completely, becomes the trigger for the avoidant's greatest defensive hatred. The relationship becomes a trap where doing everything right still produces the wrong outcome. The avoidant might become increasingly critical of their partner, finding fault with aspects of their partner's personality or behavior that threaten to keep revealing the avoidant's authentic self. They might withdraw intimacy, create conflict, or engage in behaviors designed to push their partner away, all in service of preventing the continued exposure that complete seeing creates. This hatred through being seen often creates a desperate need to reclaim their invulnerable image through secrecy and compartmentalization. The avoidant might begin hiding parts of their life, creating areas their partner cannot access, or maintaining connections that serve as proof they haven't been completely known. They need to preserve some mystery, some hidden aspect of themselves that remains unseen, to maintain the illusion that they haven't been fully exposed. This secrecy isn't necessarily about infidelity or major deception. It might be as simple as not sharing their thoughts, keeping their schedule vague, or maintaining emotional walls around certain topics. The point is to prove to themselves that their partner doesn't see everything, that they retain some control over what's revealed. The hatred intensifies when their partner demonstrates deep understanding because it threatens this carefully maintained illusion of privacy and control. The avoidant also experiences their partner's accurate perceptions as a form of entrapment. When someone truly sees them, that person gains the ability to call out their defenses, to recognize their patterns, to gently confront their avoidance. This accountability feels suffocating to someone whose entire psychology is built around escaping external judgment and expectations. Their partner's clear vision becomes a mirror they cannot avoid, reflecting back truths they'd prefer to deny. They begin to feel like they can't hide, can't pretend, can't maintain the carefully curated version of themselves they present to the world. This loss of control over their own narrative triggers hostile resentment. They might accuse their partner of analyzing them, psychoanalyzing them, or making everything about psychology. All attempts to invalidate their partner's accurate perceptions and reclaim the right to define themselves on their own terms. The hatred becomes a weapon to push away the person whose loving clarity threatens their defensive mythology. They'd rather be alone with their false self-image than be truly known and loved for who they actually are. Reason 3. They hate that love exposes their attachment needs. The third reason avoidants develop hatred toward those they love involves the way genuine love forces them to confront attachment needs they've spent their entire life denying. The avoidance core narrative revolves around not needing others, being complete within themselves, and functioning better alone. But real love awakens attachment needs that contradict this narrative, creating an internal crisis that manifests as hatred toward the person who activated those needs. When an avoidant genuinely loves someone, they begin experiencing needs they've successfully suppressed with everyone else. They want their partner's attention and affection. They feel hurt when their partner seems distant. They experience jealousy when their partner shows interest in others. They miss their partner when apart. All of these needs, completely normal and healthy in secure attachment, feel like devastating weaknesses to the avoidant. Their nervous system has been calibrated to interpret attachment needs as dangerous. Early in life, they learned that needing others led to disappointment, rejection, or pain. They developed a defensive structure that suppresses these needs, convincing themselves they don't experience them at all. Their identity became organized around being the person who doesn't need, the one who is always fine alone. But love breaks through this suppression. Their beloved becomes important enough that attachment needs can no longer be denied or ignored. The avoidant finds themselves checking their phone for messages, feeling anxious about their partner's whereabouts, wanting reassurance that they're still loved. These experiences contradict everything they believe about themselves, triggering profound psychological distress. Rather than recognizing these needs as normal human attachment, the avoidant experiences them as evidence of their own weakness and failure. They hate themselves for needing, and they transfer that self-hatred onto their partner. Their beloved becomes the person who made them feel needy, who caused their weakness, who created their dependence. This hatred manifests as resentment toward their partner for existing in a way that matters. The avoidant might become angry when their partner doesn't text back quickly enough, but frame their anger as annoyance at their partner's lack of consideration rather than acknowledging their own need for connection. They might feel hurt when their partner spends time with others, but express it as criticism of their partner's priorities rather than admitting their own attachment and jealousy. The avoidance defensive system works overtime to deny that these feelings represent attachment needs. They construct alternative explanations. They're not needy, they just value consistency. They're not jealous, they just think their partner makes poor choices. They're not missing their partner, they're just bored. Every attachment need gets reframed as something else to protect the avoidant's self-image. The hatred that develops serves to create distance from both the partner and the needs themselves. By cultivating negative feelings toward their beloved, the avoidant attempts to reduce their importance and thereby reduce the attachment needs they trigger. If they can convince themselves they don't even like their partner very much, maybe they'll stop needing them so desperately. This dynamic creates behavior that seems nonsensical from the outside. The avoidant might pursue their partner intensely, achieve closeness, then immediately begin devaluing and pushing them away. The push isn't because they don't love their partner, it's because they love them too much, triggering attachment needs they cannot tolerate feeling. Their partner experiences this as being punished for the crime of being loved. The closer they get to the avoidant, the more hostile the avoidant becomes. The more they demonstrate their love and commitment, the more the avoidant finds reasons to criticize and reject them. It creates a maddening dynamic where doing everything right produces the worst outcomes. What compounds this particular form of hatred is the avoidant's complete inability to admit what's actually happening. They cannot say, "I hate that I need you," because that admission would require acknowledging the need itself. Instead, they construct elaborate narratives about why their partner is demanding, clingy, or suffocating when the partner hasn't actually changed their behavior at all. The avoidance perception shifts as their internal needs intensify. Suddenly, the same level of contact that felt comfortable before now feels like too much, not because the contact increased, but because their resistance to their own needs has intensified. They blame their partner for being too much, when really they're terrified of wanting too much. This projection allows them to experience their self-rejection as rejection of their partner, which feels more manageable than confronting their own shame about having normal human attachment needs. The avoidance hatred also serves to test whether their partner will stay despite being treated poorly, which perversely validates both their fear and their need simultaneously. If their partner leaves due to the hostile treatment, it confirms the avoidant's belief that people abandon them when they show need or vulnerability, proving their attachment fears were justified all along. If their partner stays despite the hatred, it provides reassurance that this person won't leave even when the avoidant is at their worst, which paradoxically makes them feel safer in their attachment, while also intensifying their terror of dependence. This creates a no-win situation, where the avoidant pushes their partner away to see if they'll stay, then resents them whether they leave or remain. The attachment needs generate anxiety that can only be temporarily relieved through testing behaviors, but the relief never lasts because the underlying terror of dependence remains unresolved. The avoidant becomes trapped in compulsive testing cycles where they create crises to measure their partner's commitment, then hate their partner for either failing or passing the test. The cycle that destroys love. These three reasons interact and reinforce each other, creating a self-perpetuating cycle that makes lasting love nearly impossible for avoidance without significant psychological work. The vulnerability love triggers hatred, which creates distance, which temporarily reduces vulnerability and provides relief, which reinforces the pattern. The complete seeing that love requires triggers shame, which triggers hatred, which pushes the beloved away, which restores the avoidant's false self-image, which reinforces their defensive structure. The attachment needs love awakens trigger self-hatred, which gets projected as hatred toward the beloved, which justifies emotional withdrawal, which temporarily suppresses the needs. Their beloved, caught in this cycle, experiences profound confusion and pain. They're being hated for loving, punished for seeing, and rejected for mattering. Nothing they do can prevent the avoidant's defensive hatred, because the hatred stems not from the beloved's actions, but from the avoidant's internal psychological structure. Understanding these dynamics doesn't make them less painful, but it does provide clarity. The avoidant's hatred isn't really about their partner at all. It's about their own terror of vulnerability, their shame at being seen, and their anxiety about having needs. Their partner could be perfect, and it wouldn't prevent the defensive hatred because the hatred serves psychological functions unrelated to the partner's actual qualities or behaviors. The only path forward requires the avoidant themselves to recognize these patterns, understand their origins, and commit to the difficult work of developing secure attachment. They must learn to tolerate vulnerability without transforming it into hatred, to accept being fully seen without shame, and to acknowledge their attachment needs without self-rejection. Until an avoidant does this work, they remain trapped in a cycle where they destroy the love they desperately need. For those loving an avoidant, recognizing these patterns becomes essential for self-preservation and informed decision-making. The hatred isn't a reflection of the partner's worth or lovability. It's a window into the avoidant's internal psychological war. Partners must understand that no amount of being better, more understanding, or more patient will prevent this defensive hatred from emerging because it serves functions unrelated to the partner's actual behavior. The partner can be perfect and still trigger hatred simply by mattering too much. This recognition allows partners to stop trying to fix something that isn't actually about them and instead make clear-eyed decisions about whether they can accept a relationship where love triggers hate, where closeness produces hostility, and where their greatest offering, genuine acceptance, becomes the catalyst for rejection. The sad truth is that loving an avoidant often means choosing between tolerating cyclical hatred or leaving to preserve one's own emotional well-being.